Welcome to The Risk Equation with Dr Chris Maguire. This is a show constructed of conversations between myself and those taking on high risk, high pressure and high performance jobs. We talk to elite performers, offering us an insight into what it takes to succeed under the most strenuous of circumstances, engaging in candid and raw conversations with those who perhaps aren't always given the chance to share the struggles they've faced on their way to the top. Today's guest is Sam Fricker, an Australian diver who, at just 18 years old, is already well on his way toward his dream of the Olympic podium. Since he was a kid, Sam has been taking on challenge after challenge on his way to becoming Australia's best. Much like many of us, Sam's success in 2020 has been halted by COVID-19. The trials for the Olympics in Tokyo were pushed back a year, leaving Sam with another unwanted mountain to climb before even having a chance to reach his goal. A theme of the risk equation will be to get an understanding of how Sam and some of our incredible guests get back up from their darkest, lowest points. So each episode, no matter how successful that guest is, will begin with their greatest failure. Today for Sam, this took place in Dresden, Germany.
So it was my first international event, first time representing Australia, and it was in Dresden, Germany. We'd flown over there. I was competing one US dive. It was a back 3.5 tuck. And this new dive was my last dive. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna hit it for 10s. My coach has said to me before, you're not trying to hit for 10s. I was like, nah. I kind of got carried away with it all. And I went to that final for the 10 meter, which is my main event, and belly flopped my back 3.5 and basically failed my dive. So from then, what we did have mainly then was my training. So we'd done the dives every day. We'd go and do the basics for the dives and all the way up, and then just relying on sticking to what you've been doing in training and trying not to do anything different. And that's where I made a mistake, because I went in there and tried to do something differently and it didn't end well. So I didn't stick to my training, and that's where the mistake came from.
When you got out of the pool on that occasion, like the thing that strikes me about that moment is that not only have you, not been able to do exactly what you've been training for 2.5 years, which I'm sure you've executed hundreds of times before that day. So there's the disappointment of not being able to perform at the moment when it counted. But then you've got the trip home, and then you've got a year's worth of training before you get another shot. If you get another shot, and that's the thing, is like mentally pulling yourself out of that water and realizing with that heavy weight on your shoulders that now is the waiting game and you need to get back to the grind of it. Like, to me, that's extraordinary that you were able to do that at such a young age, because that's an extremely difficult thing to do. But under those circumstances in particular, so like, what was it that you think allowed you to get out of that pool and then get back to a point where you were productive toward getting to where you ultimately wanted to be?
Okay, well, right off the bat, it sucked. Out of everything I do, some of the hardest things I've ever had to do is pull myself back up from those low points. Like, that really pushes you to grow as a person. And it really is one of the hardest things I find I've ever had to do. So for me, personally, I like to kind of sit with it for a while, just to think about what's happened. And then after I've done that, I like to make plans. So I'll write, I'll make video, I'll talk to myself on the video or talk to my coach, and together with my coach, make the plan, work the plan.
I guess when you're performing at that sort of level, it has to be built into you, doesn't it? In a certain degree, like, you have to be structured about the way that you do things. It's not just a question of talent, is it? It's a question of deploying that talent consistently over and over and over again until it's just an automatic thing that you can jump off that board perfectly.
100%, because at the end of the day, when you're in the Olympic final or like any of these major events, like, everyone can do the dives. It's about who can do it when it matters.
You get to Dresden, that dive happens, it's not what you're looking for, and you're falling back to that 15-year-old you who says, I'm going to be a gold medalist, and suddenly you're thinking, well, maybe I can't do it. Like, I've gotten to this national event, I haven't performed where I wanted to be. And yet that self-confidence, that nugget was still there, right? Because you don't get out of that pool and say, that's it, I'm done. I've had my shot. I can't do it. You're like, let's plan again. Let's go back to the drawing board. You know, with the right resources, we can get there. That to me is extraordinary. But who was it that was reinforcing that? Was that your coach? Was that your family? Was that just coming from you?
Well, of course, my coaches were never going to give up on me. So that I knew that they were there for me. And I was devastated. And you do start to question, oh, you know, am I good enough? Like, is this me? Can I do this? In fact, at that point, I looked at the guys who were winning and I was like that, I didn't know if it was possible to see them just dive so well. It was really intimidating. And I was like, well, I don't know if I can ever be that, but there's always something inside you. But no, if I don't give up and I keep trying, I can be. And although when you do have those big failures, that belief, like sometimes, especially for that moment, it can get shrunken down. But through planning and regaining your confidence, you can bring that back up, and you can come back and achieve what you want to.
You're at a point where, you know, the world is at your fingers, but I don't think many 14 or 15-year-olds are 100% focused on, I'm going to rock up to a professional event and tell them that I'm going to be the next Olympic gold medalist. You know, like that to me is unique in a really special way. But something inculcates that sort of confidence, right? Like that's not arrogance, that's confidence, because you're willing to put in the work. You know, it's not like I'm already great, I know I'm great. It's I know that I'm not great, but I'm going to be. And you are the guys who are going to get me there, right? Like that self-confidence, was that built in, or did that come from your family, or who gave that to you?
I think self-confidence is definitely built. We're all born, I think, with the same kind of qualities. I think with some things in our DNA, like our passions and that, but I think things like self-esteem is built. And as a young kid, I was dyslexic and I had trouble with school. So I built good relationships with people to try and get through all the challenges. And I think through finding other ways to do things than just the normal way, I think that built some confidence I might not be able to do it the way they think I can do it, but I can still do it. I can do it my way.
I had a question from one of the people who follows me on TikTok, because I asked them about what sort of things they wanted to hear from you. And one of those questions really relates to this moment right here, which is, are you driven by the success or are you driven by the process? And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at this particular journey, right? Because you didn't have success at that particular event, and yet you 100% committed back to the process. And so do you feel like it's the search for success which drives you, or do you think it's just the process that you really enjoy pushing yourself on that day-to-day grind?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's became very clear through COVID because through COVID, I got it all taken away. For weeks, we were out of the pool. And I realized how much I love diving. So I'm there for the passion of the sport. Like, I love diving. So I go there for the process, but I want to win. So I think those two combined is what really makes it, because I'm there because I want to be there and I want to do well.
And what sort of techniques and strategies did you put in place to sort of address the psychological component of the sport after that point in time? You know, that part of you that said, I'm going to do this as a 10, you know, on the day where it probably should have been thinking more in the routine way that you would in training. And yet at that point in time in your head, that was where you needed to go to get to where you want it to be. What changed in the way that you approached that aspect of the sport from then on?
So when I got back, I went and saw a sports psychologist, Mike Martin, who he's really good at what he does. And he taught me some meditation, some keywords when I'm diving to keep things simple. Because I think the term KISS, keep it simple, stupid, I think it's so important. No matter how complicated things are, like when I'm diving, I think about two keywords with that. Like, although I might be doing 4.5 flips or double somersaults, I'm thinking about two words normally that will make that. So keeping things simple, meditation, like quieting the mind so then you can think in that moment that you need to. And I also got into a little bit of the Wim Hof method with cold showers and all of that, deal with stress and just get on with it.
This is so interesting because there are a lot of people in surgery who look at approaching an operation or training to perform an operation in a very similar sort of way. It's about focusing on the simple things and doing the simple things really well, and visualizing how you're about to do it, and then executing on that visualization. And I remember talking to one of my senior colleagues, who's probably one of the most experienced paediatric surgeons currently working in Australia, and he was saying that before he does a really big case, a significant oncological resection or a big abdominal procedure, he spends the time when he's scrubbing, which is sort of getting prepared for the sterile nature of the procedure. So it lasts about 5 minutes worth of hand washing before you actually don the gown and gloves. He spends that 5 minutes visualizing what he's going to do and centering himself to the task. And in a way, it's not dissimilar to the process of walking up to the board and centering yourself and having those trigger words. It's just interesting how there's mirrors in the way that people who are doing high risk or high stress things approach a similar sort of problem.
The components for success and high performance are so similar in every field, although they are completely different fields. I think the components for high success is consistent among all of them, like the visualization, the awareness, and those are things we aren't taught, I don't think, in school, which we probably should be. Visualization, because a lot of athletes, some of them don't do it, and I think it's a huge loss. I think if you're not visualizing or seeing in your head, I think that is the number one component of doing a good dive, is seeing it up here. Is it something I talk with my coaches? It's been mentioned before, but mainly it's an individual thing for me. Like they tell me what they want, and then I visualize how to do it.
It's interesting. That's similar for me in surgery. Like, we often don't talk about the psychological component of it. We don't talk about the way that we're individually preparing our mindset. And I guess a part of that is because it is quite a personal thing, isn't it? You know, like what works for one person may not necessarily work for another. So it's hard to generalize. But nonetheless, it's a critical part of performance for a lot of people. And it's interesting to sort of break that down a little bit. And so how do you unwind? How do you get out of that zone when you're having to perform, you know, so consistently? And then you've got school in between it as well. Like, it's easy to forget that you're 18, you know, like you're doing something that's so incredible, but at the same time, you've got to deal with a lot of the normal stuff as well. You know, how do you approach that?
Starting the business was super important for me for taking my mind off diving, because having the company on the side was so good for me to get my mind completely off diving and focus on something else. So when I was younger, I used to struggle with this. I used to leave the pool and I'd be like thinking about diving, like trying to do better when I wasn't at the pool. But what that does is it drains me mentally, and then I can't dive well when I go there. So the most productive thing to do is not stress about it and not think about it. And I turn off by running the business.
Tell us a bit about your business, Sam, because a lot of people listening probably won't necessarily know that not only are you an Australian level diver, but that you also happen to run a company too. So just break that down for us.
So I sell eco-friendly wheat straws to all over America through Amazon, and all over Australia through my website. I supply local restaurants, golf clubs and bars, and I'm trying to change over from paper straws, which are great until you actually put them in your drink, to wheat straws, which don't go soggy at all. They're eco-friendly. They're biodegradable in about 30, 60 days, and they're even gluten-free. So it's an obvious solution to a major problem we face. And since that plastic straw got stuck in the turtle's nose, the world has really become enraged with plastic straws. And the wheat straws are just a great solution to an international problem.
And building a business up from scratch while you're doing all of this training, like, that sounds like a lot of stress to me. What do your teachers think at school about all of this stuff? Like, how do they approach it when, you know, like you're 4 hours in the morning or 3 hours in the morning, you're training, a couple of hours in the evening as well, you've got this business on the side, and then you're attending classes as well, and I imagine trying to get some homework done and prepare for the exams. You know, how understanding are they? How much support do you get from the school? How does that all work?
I couldn't do it without them. They've been really good to me. Trinity Grammar is where I go to school. They just look after me so much when I miss exams because I'm away. they really helped me out. The teachers are really supportive.
You do some coaching as well. How have you found that experience? Like looking at your own career so far and your reflections about your learnings, how has it been sort of transitioning, not even transitioning really, but simultaneously performing at elite level yourself and then trying to give some of those lessons to a new generation coming through? How do you approach that?
From seeing my own struggles, I think it makes me more patient with the athletes, and remembering how I came through and how I was really annoying as a kid. It also makes me more tolerant of the other kids. Some of them are in year one, very young kids, between first year school and 60-year-olds. I coach a really wide variety of people. And I think it helps my diving, I think, because when I'm talking about what they need to do and doing the motions of everything they need to get right, it kind of really puts it into my brain, what I need to be doing as well. When you're doing the wrong thing for a long time, it's very hard to change. So the muscle memory plays a part, whether it's used good or bad. So when it's used correctly, it has really good effects. But when someone's doing the wrong thing all the time, that's a very negative effect. So trying to catch those mistakes early on and turn them around. But it's hard to change something that people have been doing wrong a long time. And for myself, things that I've been doing not the way I want it has also been a struggle. And to this day, like still working on my technique, of course, from now to the day I retire, I'll be working on my technique. But just the small things and getting things right and try and get them to get it right.
There's always going to be those people who are going to say, hey, Sam, all right, you've been diving for a little while, you've done it to a pretty high level, but now it's time to focus on a real job. Or who are going to say, look, starting a business, it's a lot of responsibility, it's a lot of work, maybe just focus on getting through school first and then see what you can do. There's always going to be that element, I suppose, around you until you reach a certain point of success at which it becomes inevitable that you're going to be able to do what you say you want to do. And I'm sort of interested in how you navigated it before it got to that level. Like when you get to the nationals and you're competing at that level, it becomes pretty serious. And I think people will rally behind someone more when it becomes more serious and more recognizable as a success. But when you're leading up to that point, when you're 15 and you're saying, I'm going to be an Olympic athlete, what was it that got you through those moments when you're still trying to prove to people that this was a feasible thing for you to do?
For me, I was just like, this is happening. This is what I'm doing. I don't care what I run into. I'm just going to keep going. The knowledge that I was going to make it, I was going to keep going till I got there, I think is what got me through those times. Because if you're not sure, you're like, I'm just here for fun, having a good time, going to get through it. And then something else comes up, that's different. But if you're like, I'm here to get where I want to go, and you got purpose behind that, I think you can back yourself.
When you say that, it immediately resonates with me. Because I think that those sorts of comments that I was referring to and the people who say those sorts of things will jump on uncertainty. Like if you're in a position where you're questioning whether or not that's what you want to be doing, or you're falling down at the first hurdle and suddenly it all seems a bit too hard and you're dragging your feet to get into training and, it's someone's externally required to push you to keep going. I think that those sorts of negative comments tend to feed off that.
100%. And after that failure in Dresden, I started to really ask those questions. And it wasn't until, those 2 years later where I went back, that grew me so much as a person. Because I remember looking back and thinking that was impossible. And I remember being in that stage, and really frustrated. And, people are like, you're not an international diver, maybe you're just, national level. But once you push through that, and once you come out the other side and you have some really, really good success, I think that also brings huge self-confidence once you do it.
I want to talk about that event 2 years later a little bit, because this is the part of the story that I love, because it's a culmination of so much hard work. But tell me about, one, how you even got to be back there again 2 years later, because that in itself is an achievement, just to front up after that experience, I think, psychologically and physically, and within that environment. But two, how different a person were you in that event 2 years later too?
The way I got there it's quite kind of funny, because my coach gives me a call after training one night. He's like, Sam, I want to go back to Dresden. I was like, oh, look, nah, no, I don't want to go. And then he was like, Yeah, he was like, no, we're going to go to Dresden. I was like, okay, fair enough. That's what we're doing. That's what he says. That's what we're doing. From that point, I was like, okay, I'm going here. And I didn't overthink it like I did last time. I just focused on every single day in training, what I had to do that day, and just tried to make the most of that day. I did more basics than I had been doing and really focused on the technique of the dive and just staying super calm and relaxed and being less affected by the things going on around me and just being more kind of settled, more in the moment and less kind of frantic and all over the place. Earlier that year, I'd learned one of the hardest dives in the world, the front 4.5. And so you're up on the 10-meter platform, you run, you jump, you go forward, you do 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.5 flips. You then come out, land on your hands. You all do that within the matter of a couple of seconds. So I had this new dive behind me, which made me feel good. I was the only one in that event that was competing that dive. So that was also a bit of a confidence booster. But I just remember I was waking up. I wasn't thinking about it too much. I went and got breakfast with my friend Vlad. We were just having a bit of a laugh. And I got to the pool and I was like, I'm going to win. I made a decision when I got there that morning. I was like, I got this. Of course, doubt came into my mind, all day, like small things, but I was like, no, quiet. I got this. And just focusing on the positive. I had such a clear picture of me hitting the dive and just getting out of the pool that when I was up there doing it, it felt like it was already done. And the funny thing is, when the dive I'd failed 2 years before, I hit that dive and got more points from a single judge than I did for the whole dive.
When you're learning to operate for the first time, it's always done under supervision. So you don't really have a huge amount of responsibility when you're starting out. But whenever you're starting something new or you're doing a new technique, the adrenaline starts to surge and you're concerned about how you're going to perform. Your entire body reacts to the stress of that situation. It can make your hands shake more. You can start to sweat more. It's that what we call an adrenergic response. Medically speaking. And, when you're, sitting in that moment in competition, how do you get to a point where you don't have that visceral response? Because, of course, any sort of tenseness that you would experience, which is abnormal to the regular dive, is going to affect those, the elevation that you have, how far from the board you're going, all of those minute calculations that have to happen. How do you get around that in a competition environment so that you're just executing what you were doing in training?
I laugh with my coach. It really also, it just brings me back to it, because the thing is, like, diving is an interesting sport where it's not, if you go up there and give it 100%, you're going to make a mistake, because it's not about getting 100% power. It's not about getting 100% kick. It's about taking components of everything, the right amount, and just using that right amount, because too much power and you overdo it. Not enough and you'll be short. So just taking components of that and laughing with my coach is how I deal with that response very clearly. It disappears.
One of the highest regarded qualities is not how technically good you are, though that's important, but it's about how teachable you are. It's about how willing you are to take on lessons, accept what you need to improve on and focus on those things and receive feedback and then build from that. That is the quality that will determine someone who's great from someone who's good, is their capacity to go through that loop. And I'm interested that from an Olympic point of view, do you think that it's more important in a way to be trainable than it is to be naturally talented at these sports? Or do you think that it has to be a combination of both? Or like what factors are more important?
It's definitely a balancing act, because when you're competing, you got to go up there believing you're the best and that you can do it. But then when you're in training, you got to also be humble and be like, all right, well, hey, he does that damn good, so I'm going to learn how to do it like him, or your coach tell you, you need to do it this way and changing it. So some people are more talented than others, but I think it comes down to coachability. So important, right? Because if you just stick to what you're doing, don't change, well, the results aren't going to change, that's for sure.
One of the things I found interesting in the hospital is that there's not really a clear distinction between when you're training and when you're performing. Everything is sort of happening simultaneously, because it's not sort of like you can go to spend 4 months rehearsing a procedure and a diagnosis, and then, on a particular day you get to competition event and the real thing, you walk into the hospital, you perform the operation, you perform the diagnosis, you go back to the training room and you're like, that was awesome, now let's learn another one. Like, it's not like that. And so, like, to me, I'm hugely inspired by people like you, Sam, who do this sort of incredible training and grind almost without seeing any reward for it for a long, long time before then having to do that. And so one of the benefits of, training and working simultaneously is you see the rewards and you see the improvements every day to a certain degree. You can see yourself getting better and you can see the impact that that's having on the people around you. But at the same time, it also creates an interesting cognitive dissonance where you can't make those clear distinctions as easily between I'm the person who's being trained, but then I need the self-confidence to perform. It's harder to split the personality a lot of the time. And that's really interesting to me, is sort of how do you be the humble person that you need to be trainable and to get better, but at the same time have the self-confidence and the belief to perform something that's intrinsically very risky and difficult at a level that you need to. And threading that needle is, I think, a real challenge in some areas. But I think athletes do it really, really well. But in some ways you have the benefit of being able to split it in that way that in some other areas of work you don't necessarily.
The requirements for success are so consistent over everything for high performance. So business, school, relationships, those qualities that I learned for diving, I implement in every area of my life. And it has a really positive impact because I've been through those struggles in diving. So I understand phases, and you have seasons, and, sometimes things aren't going well, but you just got to keep going. So I think those lessons learned from diving really just teach you those life lessons over everything you do. And I'm sure you'd find the same, that those techniques you've learned from surgery, you can implement everywhere in life.
Almost to a fault sometimes. Like, I'm interested in whether or not your family ever says to you, okay, Sam, this isn't a professional event. You're allowed to just relax and have some fun now for a bit. When you're doing this sort of structured, consistent work towards these goals all the time, it's invigorating by sounds for you, but I wonder whether or not it can be intimidating for people around you as well. When you're being so dogged in this pursuit and so structured and pursuing that sort of excellence, how that impacts on your relationships around you when perhaps other people aren't able to hold themselves to the same standards or are measuring themselves, against what you're achieving at any given point in time.
I think in some ways it attracts the same kind of people to you. It kind of attracts your tribe, the people that are doing similar things, and you guys run together and go further. I get along with like all my school peers very much so. So I think whether it's you surround yourself with people who are similar to you, so you'll just kind of get along because you're a little bit similar, or at least most of my friends have really strong passions for whatever they do.
I think that's a really interesting reflection as well, is that like is drawn to like a lot of the time. And when you start pursuing these sorts of things and you start directing yourself towards these sorts of goals, invariably people will come and they will be drawn to you as much as you're drawn to them. And that becomes a reinforcing process over time. And I would be willing to bet that in 15 to 20 years' time, some of your closest friends are still some of the people that you're competing with today or training with today, just because of that shared experience of pursuing excellence and those characteristics that have drawn you to each other. It wouldn't surprise me if Vlad, who you mentioned, or your coach and so forth, are still important people in your life at that stage. I've certainly found that even in my short 31 years, that there are people who I went to school with, who inspired me, who I still keep a close relationship with because I appreciate them for who they are and what they've achieved and the impact that they've had on me over time.
Having a team is so important. More recently, I've realized how important that team is. Like, from my school friends to my diving coaches to my business relationships, the team is everything, because people are everything. Like, your friends are the most important thing. The people around you are the most important part of life, because nothing's enjoyable by yourself. or not as much. So for me, I found really making sure the people I'm hanging out with make me feel good, in the sense of, they're uplifting, positive people, but they're also willing to tell me when I'm wrong. Like, I know one of my good mates, Hamish, he's very nice to me and we get along really well, but we also let each other know when we're not doing the best thing that we should be doing. And I think that's important. You don't want someone who just tells you what you want to hear. So we all like to hear, nice, positive things, but your good mate will tell you when you're doing the wrong thing as well.
With your family, how have they been about all of this? Like, that's a lot of time commuting you back and forth between events, letting you travel overseas, navigating the school process through all of that. What's their role been in all of this?
Since I've got my license, it's been easier to like, the license was so important. Like, it's changed my life. Like, being able to drive is it's such a freedom, especially for what I do, because I leave home like 5 a.m, come home at 8, 9 o'clock at night. Did
your parents just breathe this massive sigh of relief when you passed your P's? Like, thank God we don't have to drive Sam anymore at 5 o'clock in the morning every day.
Oh, yes. And that driving test was very stressful, I can tell you.
You're sitting there on a 10-meter board and you're feeling, completely calm, and you hop into the driving test at the transport office.
Driving test.
Did you have a chat to the instructor and be like, mate, you don't realise how important this is to me?
No, they're like dead silent. They definitely weren't up for any jokes.
I have this image of you with your coach sitting next to the car as you're about to hop in, just cracking a joke and being like, Sam, it's just like the dive, mate. Go ahead, do your thing.
I would have rather been diving. I remember thinking that actually, like I can do this stuff, but this is scary.
Mate, I have absolutely no doubt that if you have faced the turmoil of the driving test, that the Olympic trials will be absolutely no hurdle at all for someone such as yourself. When at the moment is it that you're going to be competing in that event to get a spot at the Olympics for Australia?
I believe I think it's next June. So everything was pushed back exactly 1 year. So the Olympic trials, they'll push back a year. So it was basically just hitting the big reset button on the year for us. It's been hectic, but that's what we're striving towards at the moment.
Well, mate, for next June, I'll certainly be watching, and I hope that a lot of other people will be watching as well, to wish you all the best to get onto that Olympic team. I think we'd all be honoured to have you there representing us in Japan in a year's time. And it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast and to have a chat to you. I've learned so much from you, and I'm always amazed at the wisdom that can come from people, regardless of their age, who are doing incredible things. And thank you for taking the time to share that with me and share that with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me on, and coming from someone with your as a doctor, that's very impactful. I appreciate it.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to The Risk Equation. I really appreciate it. The conversation you're listening to now was a real pleasure for me to be involved in. Hearing about Sam's diving career, his business endeavours and his social media was incredibly interesting. And if anyone's interested in learning more about what Sam does online, you can follow him on TikTok at Sam Fricker, that's Fricker with 2 R's, or on Instagram at sam.fricker. Sam mentions his business a few times throughout the show, and if you're interested in learning more about that, Google the name. It's Tazarian. It's a fantastic company doing amazing things that are ecologically supporting not just our country but the rest of the world as well. And supporting Sam and supporting similar companies really going to help to grow the sustainable effort even further. So that's Tazarian with a silent T, and feel free to let Sam know that you came from the Risk Equation podcast.